Hey everyone, we're going to be looking at somatotype classifications today. My name is Dylan LeBlanc. To start off, we'll be looking at the three types of classifications. So, as you can see over to the right, we have two pictures. The bottom picture is going to be a little bit more blown out of proportion, and then the top one's going to be pretty lifelike. So to start off, the three classifications are endomorph, mesomorph, and ectomorph. Just to give a description of each, we have the endomorph. So the endomorph is going to be a person with wider hips, narrower shoulders. Typically, these people are going to have a lot of fat on the body, and that fat is mainly going to be found in the upper arms and thighs. And they also typically have slimmer wrists and ankles. Now, if we look at the mesomorph is going to be a very muscular body. They might have a larger head, however, they're going to have broader shoulders and very narrow hips, kind of like a wedge shaped. So they usually have strong forearms, and they also have kind of like a low body fat percentage. Now, if we look at the third classification, which is ectomorph, we're going to see someone who's very skinny. Now, they're going to have narrow shoulders and hips. They might have a thin face and high forehead. They're going to have very thin legs and arms, and they're going to have very little muscle, as well as like very low body fat. So if we go to our next slide, we're going to look at how do these classifications affect joints. Looking at an ectomorph first, an ectomorph will have a lot smaller joints. And this kind of has to play into their fast metabolism as well as their inability to gain weight. If we look at an endomorph, however, due to that excess body fat, they're going to have a lot more strain on the joints in everyday activity. And finally, we have mesomorphs who definitely have a higher risk of injuring the joints due to their athleticism and excessive use of the joints. So a lot of this have to do with the primary weight-bearing joints. I think that has a big those are the main joints that are going to have a big effect on the impact of that. So we have the ankles, we have the knees, the hips, feet, the pelvis, the lower back, and the spine. And this definitely comes into being an endomorph with excess body fat, leading to more strain on the joints, because if you're having that excess body fat, it's going to put a lot of the strains on the joint, especially if you're doing activity that is pretty serious. So our next slide, we have how does somatotype classification play a role in injuries during weightlifting. I thought it was just kind of cool to look at weightlifting specifically for these classifications because personally I just go to the gym a lot and I see definitely a lot of different body types going around and they fit exactly to these categories. So how do these injuries affect you during weightlifting? If you look at endomorph over here, the more weight is on the body, it's going to be causing increased difficulty during a training session. So having that increased weight is going to be putting more strain on the muscles, more strain on the joints, causing it harder. Overall, a negative impact on the joint function. If we look at a mesomorph now, specifically, a good example of this is going to be the next video of Brian. Usually these people are going to be very athletic, so if they're very athletic, their confidence is going to go up. Especially if they're in the gym, it can lead to overuse on the muscles, maybe working the muscle too hard, causing strains and tears. So usually these people can kind of attempt to lift maybe more than they're capable, and that can actually cause an injury. And then lastly, we have an ectomorph. So an ectomorph is going to have low muscle mass, very brittle bones, and this combination here might cause an injury during a training session. Kind of like with the mesomorph, they might feel like they can do something and they're not actually going to be able to do something just because they don't have very strong joints and they're a little bit smaller, so they're going to be more susceptible to injury. Now when it comes to, of course, avoiding this injury, I think for the most part it's definitely having the intelligence and knowledge for weightlifting. Maybe a mesomorph because they're that type of body shape, they might have a little bit more experience going to the gym and weightlifting as compared to an endomorph who might not be doing this very often. It's his first time in there, as well as an ectomorph. So I think having the proper knowledge on how to lift as well as even proper nutrition, so that way you maybe avoid having